Okay. So yeah, thanks for having me. And maybe extensive is said too much, as I'm actually not 100% sure how drones can be used in DRR projects like you guys are doing. But before we get closer into this, maybe again quickly about drone adventures, where actually there is a name change project on the way, and you will hear soon from us on that project. For now, it's still called Drone Adventures though, and our purpose is to use drones and just in general geospatial technologies that can be satellite imagery, other remote sensing forms, GIS, etc., as a powerful and exciting tool that can be used to make a world a better place. We are around 25 people, and we're not a professional NGO like most of you guys are from, but we have a lot of skills and different kinds of knowledge within our NGO. And that can range from environmental engineers, GIS specialists, surveyors, aerospace engineers, software and robotics, developers, drone pilots, etc. So a bit all sorts. We also been now working quite a bit with students that work on AI algorithms, for example, for classifying vegetation and tracking animals via their footprints, in order to do better wildlife management and therefore protect and help in conservation of the nature. Material that we own is mainly, well, we do own as a hardware drones with cameras, and we do have access to processing software and GIS solutions, as we're often being supported by tech companies. We have connections throughout the drone industry, GIS industry, robotics industry. So really, we can pull off a lot if we know what you guys need and want. So one thing would be just general data collections with drones or from satellites or from planes, and then process the data into 3D models or 2D models, whichever way. We can also continue this into analysis, of course, etc. So, of course, this data, once it's collected and processed, it's nice to look at, but not very interesting yet. So what one wants to do next is do some analysis on it by putting it in some other software, like a GIS software, where one can actually start to work with the data, run classifications, or digitize it even manually, etc., and otherwise try to quantify what there is to see. We've been also involved in knowledge transfer projects where we basically teach the local communities on how to use tools like drones or GIS software, etc. We have also run a couple of mapathons, where a mapathon is, some of you may know, a gathering of people where we actually digitize from satellite imagery that is provided by HotOSM. HotOSM is based on the OpenStreetMap platform, and they specifically have projects ongoing that are either urgent or less urgent to be digitized around the world. Yeah, and now basically comes the question, what do you need? Or how could we, as an organization, fit into your kind of project, where my intention is to give you a couple of ideas, as I just did now, and now a couple more, and then I'll have a little questionnaire for you guys, or we can also run it in the Teams if you want to. So one of those projects would be like actually building these kind of 3D models physically, like basically setting up a model colorize it, and getting people to discuss their environment and what could be done and what could be improved. This has been done previously throughout Africa. Mainly there was some project, I think, in the Philippines. It wasn't directly us, but it has shown that people, especially locals and local government, were able to then be very engaged and actually own those projects. Like, they really managed to grow their ownership of it. Sometimes also just a printed map. So I think met their colleague there. Printed maps also help people to have a better understanding. Now these are maps that show orthomosaics, and of course one could even do these kind of maps over times and sort of do a change detection or monitoring, which may be very interesting in the DRR context, but that's the question on how far one wants to go. And then from the Red Cross colleague, Georg Heim, who did the project in Honduras and in a valley where he created basically a risk assessment map for a flooding scenario. And here one could basically take now this map, go to the people and have like quantified proof that certain houses are in a higher risk zone than others, etc. And therefore one basically has a better understanding, or can grow better understanding for reasons to do these kind of projects and for reasons to then implement protection. Or then, I'm not sure how far you guys want to take things, but here in Switzerland we have the geo catalog on the maps.admin.ch, where basically there are risk maps for almost anything, be it avalanches, fault processes or floods, and it's just a matter of checking the layer. So there would just be the matter of actually gathering the data and doing the calculations. I have seen that in 2016, actually I was there myself, but I was totally not introduced to the context of that event. There was already a drone discussion, and there was Pictar was there, Geo context, I think, drone adventures, and MEDER presented their project. And it was, I looked at the material and I was thinking that it may have been a bit, too technical or too precise, or a proper Swiss style, where maybe that sort of level is not necessary for the areas where we are looking at. Maybe a bit more basic would suffice, and therefore make the workflow to generate the data and to deal with the data more easy. Now, this was all talking about more sort of the mapping side and data collection side of things, and how to display data. But there could also be, of course, if you're interested, other topics like general drone technology. Do you want to know more about cargo drones and where that technology is today? Is it already usable or it's not? And what are the challenges? Inspections with drones, certain rescue stuff. Or then it can also be application specific. I heard before Swiss Aid is doing a lot on the agriculture side. Like, would they be interested in knowing more about how to do monitoring with either satellite or other imagery on the progress of these agricultural projects? Or forestry, of course, and deforestation. There's a lot around, of course, already, but I'm not sure if you guys are using those resources yet, know how to, or if that would be something that we could talk about. Yeah, and that would be it.
Thank you very much, Andrea. You've woken up stuff in the sense of the question with the DRR platform. What you need. You gave a couple of examples to get us thinking. I'm sorry, I can still not use my camera, so I will only be able to speak. So I would like now to open the floor to any of the members who got inspired by the examples that Andrea gave, or want to share a question or a comment with Andrea on what she's presented. I see the hand of Thomas. Please, Thomas, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. I would have one question to Andrea. You know, sometimes it's very costly to do baselines. For example, if you want to know how much biomass is there on the ground and from the vegetation, how much carbon is bonded. And so would it be possible via drones to baseline that? And would it be accepted also by the donors? You mentioned also artificial intelligence, because you need to somehow calculate, huh?
Yeah.
And yeah, to do kind of
yeah, so for biomass, if one goes from drone imagery, one can definitely
you need to calibrate it somehow. Yeah,
drone data, yeah, it depends on this. What you mean by calibrate? You mean based on vegetation indexes?
You might have a nice picture, but how much biomass does it mean? So you have to calibrate it.
From imagery, one can run classification on what is vegetation and what's not. That can also be divided into like fields and forests or bushes, etc. So these are all different categories that one can basically automatically create. And then one can get an estimation of the biomass from these calculations, because ultimately those are zones.
But you know, there are different layers of vegetations, and is it possible also to calculate that?
Yeah. If one has 3D point clouds, one can calculate also taking into consideration the height of the vegetation. Within a forest that has multiple layers, like a rainforest, that will be hard to separate between the different stories it has. But in general, if one wants to have forest and lower cut forest, etc., the height of all the trees can be taken into consideration and therefore give you a more precise estimate. For that, you would need point clouds though, rather than just flat imagery, which means it's either drone or plane, but not satellite.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Then Arabella, you have also raised your hand.
Yes, I was wondering, as you provide some form of consultancy service, but are not a traditional consultancy, as you are an NGO, what is your policy when you do your assessments? Do you make them open source so that they can be shared with other organizations, or what is your take on that?
So usually we are looking, of course, if the data can be open source, that is always great, and we share it often with scientists that are working on AI algorithms and just needs a ton of data to actually start to get somewhere in this topic. But it's not a must. It's not a must. Of course, we are also happy to create any type of sort of marketing article or social media, if we're mentioned anywhere, that will help us in the future just to have proof that we have been active and therefore, and that we're doing something, and therefore we can apply for grants for whichever reasons, etc. So there is, but this doesn't have to necessarily go in detail. Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that. Then I'll pass on the word to Ilse van Rooij, please.
Hi, yes, sorry, Andrea, I guess a very basic down-to-earth question. So imagine if we were doing a project where we thought that maybe drones could help us. How would it work? Would we approach you and then you would provide us a cost estimate of how much the intervention would, it's as simple as that?
Yes, it would be as simple as that. Yeah.
Okay. And then, of course, I imagine that in different countries there's different legislation about where you can operate drones and all that. That is maybe relatively complex.
Definitely. So before starting a project, of course, one would look at, let's talk drone project, one would look at how big is the area and where is it in the world and what are the regulations. Will we manage to import material sort of easily and without major delays? Would have to find the right moment in the season as well to fly, if it's of course weather dependent. Yeah.
Okay. Have you also had maybe sometimes problems with the local population not at all being familiar with drones and you know?
So it's always on, if you go in a very rural area or where people are far from technology and everything, yeah, and it's not known, it's always good to have some local leaders or government that are participating, and then you do sessions with the people where you show them what you're gonna do, and you do potentially a little demo session where you fly and then you show them the outputs and then they understand what you're doing. That would definitely be important.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ilse, for bringing it down to earth. I also saw that Patricia would like to pose a question.
Yes, thank you, Bernita. Yeah, my question is also related with access, and how have you been able to handle the issue of permits at the government level to be able to use drones, especially in context of humanitarian crisis where there are security problems, no? For example, would it be great to assess the risk of droughts in Afghanistan or monitor floods in South Sudan? And yeah, I want to hear about that. Thank you.
Regulations. So all of these could, of course, also be then a topic of an e-learning event that we could organize in fall if you guys are interested on all these type of topics, where for that I also shared now in the chat Google Forms, little questionnaire, just I think it's 4 or 5 questions or so, just to get a better idea where your interests are at. And if you don't find anything to answer in there, please feel free to just add a note. I left plenty of options to leave opinions or suggestions, etc. As in terms of regulations, and that has come up last time already, it's definitely a challenge, and it's really a matter of starting as soon as possible and finding the right contacts, and then you get in. Usually you would talk to once you manage the whole importation side of things, you would need to coordinate with the CAAs, with the local ones. These are the civil aviation authorities. And one has to coordinate there and see what their requirements are for drone flights, and one has to explain what sort of safety features the drone you're bringing in has. And then potentially adapt, not fly in certain zones, or once one is ready to fly, or then the CA will tell you, okay, you can fly there, but only between 10 and 12 in the morning or so. Then that way a NOTAM is launched, which is a notice to airmen. So that means that all other air traffic knows that there is drone activity in this area at a certain height, and that way the communication to everyone is done. And I don't know, like for real emergencies, I don't know, but yeah, how fast things can be moved, but it's sometimes also possible.
There seem to be a lot of questions coming up, Andrea. So I hope I'm doing it in the right order. Sonia, I saw your hand early on.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to understand whether, Andrea, whether you're as specialist on satellite imagery as on drones, or whether this is something you just do sometimes, provide satellite imagery, because that could be interesting for monitoring.
Cool. So myself, I studied remote sensing and GIS, so I'm used to working with satellite imagery, and then it's a matter to source it, like from Planet or so. I know that, for example, ICRC, they have a good connection with Planet, and they use their drone imagery for monitoring and like for their food security stuff, etc. And yeah, for your project, as it sounds like, I'm not sure if you have to deliver proof over time of how it progresses, or want to see how it progresses basically from far, but it would definitely be an advantage to do that from space.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Okay, then I would like to give the word to Tony, who also had his hand raised.
Yes, a bit a question on collaboration and drawing on the experience of Honduras, but not with having so much expertise as we had there, meaning that basically we would be interested in having digitalized data on parts of a project intervention area, you know, the critical sites. The project area would be like the Emmental, quite widespread, and then you would have at least 20 critical sites where you would spend a day or so per site. And sometimes you could do 2 sites a day. There would not be too much know-how on the ground, meaning that, and no material, meaning that we would kind of ask for your services there,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe 1 month, all in all, a month time. You know, what would be, how would this contract look like? Can you say that? You know, to be a bit more specific. And the result would be just a digitalized, you know, orthophotos, just the usual package. But then to do hazard maps out of it, that would be then again part of the project probably, huh?
And DSM, it depends on what kind of hazard one is looking at, right? If the
floods, landslides.
So DSM, so pretty much what the Georg has done.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes. But just to understand, this was quite, you know, quite a big thing. But would you be able to partner in such a project? You know, to be in country to do that stuff, and because there would be no skills from the part of the project to do that. And how much, you know, what would be then, you know, what would be the contract on that? So
definitely we. Just 2 weeks ago, I was in Namibia for a project, and I did around 50 flights in 1 week. was a lot, but was pushing it. But that's the idea. So in terms of the technology, I also see, I think it would be too much effort from each one of your organizations to actually try to implement drones and their use and having, like, maintaining the hardware and growing the skills, etc. Maybe some of you already have a GIS person or a position that could then deal with the data, but otherwise the idea would be that we as Drone Adventures could help out on this. So if you have a need for either drones or satellites or whichever, we could jump in and help out, and we're definitely available to come out into the field, where we'd usually need expenses covered, or that's what we're mainly looking at. expenses covered for going there and having sort of accommodation for 2 people. And then we, because drone, at least for drone flying, it would be it's better to be always 2 operators instead of 1, just, one backs each other up. And then in terms of, and then depending on the amount of flights or amount of terrain, where I haven't really had any numbers, but there are some costs towards material maintenance and processing afterwards, because processing takes up quite a bit of time. For a project like this, I mean, if one sends, let's say it's a 2-week project, 2 people flights, maybe an accommodation usually is not much. I mean, we're not fancy, but take a tent and we're good. But then you'd need, whatever. Okay. That will be around 5,000-ish, and then another maybe 2,000-3,000 for equipment. But to be discussed, and we are happy to also look into getting funding or sourcing stuff and material.
And of course, you would need a accompaniment, logistic support, etc. Of course, you know, in the project area.
Yeah.
People accompanying you and doing the connections, the relationship, etc. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Wow, you almost have a complete pro forma there. That's very good. Thanks a lot. I saw 2 other hands raised, but I'm not sure if they. I saw a hand raised by Jonathan and by Jana. Were the questions resolved over time, or were you simply tired of holding up your hand? What happened?
No, actually, Andrea just answered my question pretty much when she answered Tony's question. It was really towards this, whether you would also just do the GIS consultation and not, because I mean, when it comes to drones, then it's hardware and a lot of things around that. So, but maybe there are already existing data that needs to be analyzed. So my question was surrounding that, but I gather that you would also just do that part and support with just the analysis and not with the drones. If I get you correctly.
Yes. Yeah. Definitely. So it would just also be important to always I mean, with all this drone data and doing GIS, etc., if one doesn't have some sort of an application or a platform to access the data to look at it afterwards, it can become a bit tricky and will feel to you like it's inaccessible. So one would have to discuss upfront what the actual output should be that will be of help to any of you, be it a report as a PDF, or does one actually print stuff, or does one look into uploading maps into some sort of platform where one can easily share the results. So, yeah.
Yep. Thank you.
But we can totally find solutions and find out together what is helps your purpose best. I mean, all the monitoring stuff, or risk hazard maps, if that's really something that is useful to you, or so fill in the form and and of course feel free to contact me anytime, and we look at what your needs are. Definitely keen to help out.
Thanks.
Well, that's great. Jana, did you also have a question still?
It's resolved, thank you.
Okay, wow. That's really great. I don't see any other hands. I had perhaps from my side just a question, Andrea. To what extent do you also do capacity building in the countries where you work with local companies or local teams or I don't know, startup universities? for a project or an organization in the country to be able to continue on those services without, let's say, a need to fly in Swiss expertise. I mean, that's of course important, but to what extent do you also do that?
Local training is definitely possible. It sometimes needs a bit of bigger setup, and it takes like over time, well, depending on the types of projects, one may end up having to go in 2 or 3 times just to double check on how they're progressing, flying on their own and how this is going. But I also have other resources that are very much into this type of projects, where one could start collaborations, etc. So you may heard about We Robotics and flying labs. So I can totally introduce those kind of concepts as well. So these guys are, I think they get quite a bit of funding by the UNDP or so, and the World Bank often as well. And they're really active globally and have these basically labs installed where they call them flying labs, and these little companies that involve students, do knowledge transfer, etc., where they're all part of a bit bigger network where they meet regularly to exchange how their drone flying and GIS stuff is going, and that's how they learn.
Okay. Thanks a lot for that. Any other question, remarks, thoughts? Yes, Tony, I see you're raising your hand.
Yes. If there is not any more regarding your presentation, maybe regarding the survey that you put in there and what is planned, I think that would be a good opportunity here to highlight that, because we from the core group, we know, but probably the others, they don't really know,
I just put it in. So yeah, again, in the chat, there is this survey to actually learn what your needs are and fill it in, and then we can discuss. I'll probably meet up with you, Tony, or so at some station to see what the results of the survey are, and maybe better define on what we could do on an e-learning event or something similar.
Yeah, you will see in the annual plan of operation that we put that as one of several learning events coming up. This as a virtual one, a bit learning how to better understand what we can do.
Yeah. The thing is also, I don't know where you guys are at and what your backgrounds are exactly. How much are you in touch already with maps and what kind of maps? So it could also be an option to run a mapathon together if that's something that you've never done as part of the e-learning event, for example, where it's quite simple. You can make a competition who digitizes most houses.
Okay, then we know what's up for us to do to fill in the small survey, also to prepare the contents and to of course test the waters for a learning event on this topic. If there are no more questions and comments, I would like to really thank Andrea again for her input and for getting us thinking about how the services of your organization could help our work. I think it was a really nice way to set it up.